8 years ago, my life turned upside down when my husband, Robert, made a shocking decision that changed everything for me and our children. Out of the blue, he came to me and announced that he was leaving us. He had fallen in love with a girl he met online, someone he described as incredibly attractive. I was completely blindsided. Robert had been acting differently for weeks, but I thought it was just work stress. We had been married for over a decade, and I believed we were solid. The idea that he could cheat never crossed my mind. One night, Robert finally revealed the truth. He admitted he had been talking to a woman named Isabella for 3 months and that he felt a connection with her that made him realize he wasn't happy in our marriage. Hearing those words felt like a dagger to my heart. I was overwhelmed with feelings of anger and despair. Despite the pain, he tried to reassure me that he still loved us, but he couldn't ignore his feelings for Isabella. He insisted he needed to meet her in person to see where it could lead. As he spoke, I felt like everything was closing in on me. When I asked him if he was really leaving us for this woman, he nodded slowly. It was like a final confirmation of everything I feared. He told me that he had thought it through and needed to do this for himself. He promised to support us financially but was determined to follow what he felt was true love. My world felt like it was crumbling. I couldn't understand how he could leave our family for someone he had never even met face to face. In that moment, I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but when I looked into his eyes, I realized he had already made his choice. Robert moved out the following week, and I was left to explain to our children that their father wouldn't be coming back. Our daughter Emily, who was just 9 years old at the time, had a flood of questions that I had no answers to. Meanwhile, Nathan, only 4, couldn't fully grasp what was happening but clung to me tightly, sensing that something was incredibly wrong. I felt completely numb and shattered, but my children were my anchor, keeping me from sinking into despair. When I finally told my family about what Robert had done, they were just as confused and heartbroken as I was. My parents urged me to take legal action, but I was so lost in my emotions that I still held on to the hope that Robert would return. His parents were devastated too. They couldn't understand why their son would leave us, and they called him repeatedly, begging him to come back home. But Robert was firm in his decision, and what felt like a nightmare continued. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I had to gather the strength to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives, not just for myself, but for Emily and Nathan. Family and friends surrounded us with support, offering their help and love. I focused on finding work to create a stable home for my children, but the hurt from Robert's betrayal lingered. During this time, Robert's parents stepped in to help, giving me financial support and babysitting the kids when I needed a break. Fast forward to now, and 8 years have passed since Robert walked out of our lives. His presence faded into nothing more than a distant memory. He used to send us money occasionally, but that too has become rare. The pain of his departure may never fully leave, but I've done my best to build a new life for my children and me, learning to navigate the world without him. He used to send us money every now and then, but beyond that, he rarely reached out to me or the kids. Over the years, I have more or less taken on the role of a single mother. I have worked hard, putting in long hours to make sure my children have everything they need, both in terms of material support and the love and attention they truly deserve. Although Emily would occasionally remember her father, she eventually stopped trying to get in touch with him and learned to avoid bringing him up altogether. Nathan's memories of him are even more faded, he hardly ever mentions their father. Despite the absence of their dad, both Emily and Nathan have grown into remarkable young individuals. They've shown resilience and strength, managing to flourish even with the pain of losing their father hanging over them. Recently, there was a twist when Robert's father passed away quite unexpectedly. We all attended the funeral to pay our respects, and afterward, his family lawyer reached out to me with news about the will. The lawyer explained that Robert's father had set aside some money for his grandchildren. While the amount wasn't huge, it would certainly help with covering some of the kids' college expenses. I gathered my children and shared the good news. The relief was instant, they wouldn't have to worry about college costs anymore. Their faces lit up with joy, and seeing that happiness was a heartwarming moment for me. It felt like a heavy burden had been lifted from our shoulders, allowing us to breathe a little easier after such a long stretch of uncertainty. Everything seemed to be falling into place at last. Then, last week, an unknown number appeared on my phone. To my surprise, it was Robert on the other end. A wave of mixed emotions rushed over me, and I found myself speechless at the sound of his voice after so many years. It had been 8 years since we last spoke. He sounded hesitant but insisted he needed to meet me urgently. Confused, I asked him for more details. He expressed a desire to discuss some sort of offer with me and repeatedly urged me that we needed to see each other. I couldn't fathom why he was reaching out now after so long, when he had previously chosen to stay away. His repeated requests were hard to ignore, so after a moment of thought, I cautiously decided to agree to meet him. We set a time to meet at a cafe near my office. As I hung up, my mind was racing with questions and anxieties about the upcoming meeting. I chose to keep this sudden contact a secret from my kids until after I spoke with him, wanting to see what this mysterious offer was all about. The days leading up to our meeting felt like an emotional roller coaster. I kept replaying memories of the past, remembering the pain of Robert leaving, the struggles I faced raising our children alone, and the years spent coping with his abandonment. On the day of our meeting, I arrived early, nervously sipping coffee as I waited for him. It didn't take long before he walked in. He approached with a mix of hesitation and determination that I noticed right away. He looked older, worn down, and somehow different from the man I had once married. Our first few exchanges were awkward, filled with pauses and hesitant words. We avoided talking about the big issue between us and instead focused on polite greetings and catching up on what had happened over the years. It felt like we were two strangers trying to figure out how to relate. Eventually, Robert found his voice and started to explain why he suddenly reappeared in our lives. He talked about how his relationship with Isabella did not go as he had hoped. Apparently, she was a single mother too, but had kept that a secret from him until he found himself at her doorstep long after he had left us. Their relationship had faced a ton of challenges, especially because of her gambling addiction that led her to waste all of Robert's money. They fought a lot, but Robert hesitated to walk away, not wanting to give up on someone again. However, after his father's death, he began to realize how short and precious life can be and how important it was to not stay in an unhappy situation. He admitted that he missed everyone and regretted the choices he had made 8 years ago. Robert confessed that he had thought about reaching out to us many times over the years. Robert had thought about coming back to us multiple times, but he never found the courage to face us again after everything that had happened. During our conversation, he revealed that his father had left him their lake house, a large property where we used to spend our summers together before he decided to leave our family. It was a place filled with memories, laughter, and good times, but those days felt so far away now. He mentioned wanting to sell the house, which he believed would provide him with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. I sat there, quietly listening as he spoke, processing everything he was saying. Then, Robert shocked me with a proposal I never expected. He expressed his desire to return to our lives, suggesting he could provide our children with a luxurious lifestyle, one that would free me from ever needing to work again if I accepted him back into our family. I stared at him in disbelief, trying to grasp the weight of his words. He assured me that with the money from selling the lake house, we could live without the constant worry about finances that had become such a part of our lives. Essentially, Robert wanted us to reconcile and give our family a second chance, using this inheritance to create a better future together. I listened carefully, aware of the potential benefits his plan could bring. However, I couldn't shake the memories of the painful years during his absence. It felt impossible to overlook all those times I had to manage everything on my own, raising our children while juggling a job. While the idea of financial security was undeniably tempting, the hurt and anger from his abandonment loomed heavy in my heart. I told him firmly that, although I appreciated his offer, the last 8 years of solitude and struggle were something I couldn't just forget. I explained that I had built a stable life for myself and our kids, and I had to protect them from experiencing that kind of pain again. Trust was a massive issue, and I was unsure if I could ever trust him not to walk away again. Robert continued to plead with me, desperation filling his eyes as he tried to convince me to reconsider. But deep down, I knew that allowing him back into our lives would mean taking a huge risk that could potentially jeopardize the stability I had worked so hard to create. It hurt to think about rejecting his offer, especially considering how much relief it could bring us financially, but I couldn't ignore the emotional scars from our past. Since our meeting, my parents kept urging me to rethink my decision to reject Robert's proposal. They believed that, given everything he had put us through, the least he could do now was to provide a better life for me and our children, one free from financial worries. They insisted that people can change and suggested that perhaps Robert had finally recognized his mistakes and genuinely wanted to rebuild our family. They labeled my reluctance as selfish, arguing that I should prioritize my children's comfort and well-being over my own heartache. I spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with this choice, unsure of what the right path was. I hadn't found the courage to discuss Robert's return with my children, worried about how they would react and how they would cope with the idea of their father potentially re-entering their lives after 8 years of silence. Doubts filled my mind as I weighed the benefits of accepting his offer against the painful memories we had of the past. So I turned to Reddit to ask for opinions. Am I wrong for rejecting Robert's offer and possibly depriving my children of a better life? Not long after I posted, I received a flood of comments and messages, and I felt relieved that most people did not see me as the bad guy. Listening to the advice of others, I realized it was time to have an honest conversation with my children about Robert and his unexpected return. I didn't want him to come back into their lives out of nowhere. That would be too much. Today, after dinner, I sat down with Emily and Nathan. I tried my best to gently introduce the topic, explaining who their father was and the offer he made to come back into our lives. Their faces showed a mix of curiosity and confusion as they processed what I was saying. When I shared about his inheritance of the lake house and his desire to sell it for our financial benefit, their reactions varied greatly. Emily, now 17, went through a whirlwind of emotions from anger to shock. She was just as confused as I had been, struggling to understand the situation unfolding before us. Emily felt confused about Robert's decision to come back into our lives after so many years. While she held memories of her father and occasionally missed him, she couldn't shake off the hurt that his absence had caused. She explained that, at first, she had genuinely missed having a father figure around, but, over time, she had learned to adapt and live without him. Now, she was certain that she didn't want him in her life anymore. Nathan, who was now 12 years old, chimed in with his own feelings. He had no memories of Robert at all, so the news of his potential return didn't really impact him. He was indifferent about the situation, struggling to fully comprehend what it meant for our family. I made it clear to both of them that whatever choice they felt was best was perfectly valid, and I completely respected their feelings. Emily was firm in her stance, stating without hesitation that she had no interest in meeting Robert, and Nathan echoed her sentiments by saying he was happy with how things were. I started to realize that while the thought of bringing our family back together seemed appealing, the emotional scars from the past were still very real, and the well-being of my children had to be my top priority. I felt confident that I had made the right decision to turn away from Robert that day in the cafe. Following that, I knew I needed to discuss what to do next with my parents. Contrary to what others might think, I never intended to stay married to Robert. He left before we finalized our divorce. At that time, I didn't have the resources to stand up to him, but I had come to the conclusion that staying married to him served no purpose anymore. Lately, Robert's phone calls had taken on a desperate tone, increasing in frequency and urgency over the past few weeks. No matter how many times I told him I didn't want him back, he kept calling, which made me feel trapped and emotionally exhausted. I began to worry that he might show up unexpectedly at my workplace or even at the kids' school, so I decided it was necessary to reach out to his mother. She was aware of his return and seemed like the only person who could help me understand his motivations and figure out how to handle his relentless pursuit. When I met with her, I laid out my plans to formally end things with Robert and expressed my frustration over his unending calls. It was during this conversation that she revealed a surprising truth about his motivations. She explained that Robert's father had put a cleverly hidden clause in his will regarding the lake house. If Robert wanted to become the property owner, he needed to return to our family. This news left me reeling. I finally understood why he had been pursuing me so doggedly for weeks. It wasn't about wanting to reconcile or repair the damage, it was about the house and securing his claim to it. This realization felt like a deep betrayal, and I knew I had to carefully consider my next steps. Understanding Robert's true intentions made it clear that I could no longer remain in a relationship built on manipulation and secrets. I began looking for a lawyer who could help me set the wheels in motion for the divorce proceedings. I also had conversations with my parents, who now regretted suggesting that I reconsider Robert's offer. They understood that he had not changed for the better over the years and fully supported my decision to move forward with the divorce. They expressed regret for ever encouraging me to listen to him and recognized how crucial it was for me to walk away. At this point, I had blocked Robert's number, ensuring he wouldn't be able to disturb my life any further. I planned to confront him directly when I served him with the divorce papers. Fast forward 2 months since my last update, and I finally have some positive news to share. As I mentioned, I was gearing up to serve Robert with the divorce papers. So, I contacted him under the guise of wanting to meet up. He was quick to agree. Emily and Nathan expressed a desire to see their father one last time. They had many questions and felt it was important for them to find some closure after everything that had happened in the past. We arranged a meeting, knowing it would be a significant moment for the kids. We set up a meeting at a local park, a place that held many happy family memories before Robert left us. It felt like a neutral spot, a place where we could talk without too much tension hanging in the air. Emily was looking at her father with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. You could see that she had a lot of questions and doubts. Nathan, on the other hand, was clinging to my side, feeling a bit awkward about the whole situation. I took a deep breath and began the conversation. I told Robert that I knew he had reached out to us after all this time for a reason, and I was well aware of his real motive. Robert quickly protested, claiming that it wasn't just about the money from his father's will that pushed him to contact us. He insisted that he genuinely wanted a second chance, a chance to reconnect with us. But I shook my head in disbelief. I couldn't trust him after everything that had happened. I told him plainly that we were done and that he owed it to our kids to provide them with some kind of closure by answering their questions. Robert nodded, looking serious. Emily was the first to speak up. She asked him if leaving us for another woman had been worth it. Robert looked down in shame as he answered, saying he felt lost at the time and had made a terrible mistake. Nathan, who always cut to the chase, asked if finding his own happiness was really more important than leaving his kids and his wife behind. Robert took a deep breath and admitted that he wasn't thinking clearly when he left us and that he was wrong to do so. My children, who are perceptive and strong, weren't satisfied with just those vague answers. Robert tried to explain his affair by saying it was part of a midlife crisis. The conversation went on, and Robert began sharing painful details about his life with Isabella, the struggles they faced together, and his realization that he had been chasing an illusion all along. Emily and Nathan listened carefully. I could tell they were skeptical of his sincerity. They pressed on, asking why he had never kept in touch and if he truly regretted leaving us at all. I could hear the pain in their voices as they sought answers. Robert confessed that he had been overwhelmed by guilt and hadn't known how to confront the consequences of his actions. He kept saying that he wanted our family to be whole again and even mentioned that he was now in a place to provide us a luxurious life. Looking into my children's eyes, I realized the decision was clear. They didn't believe him, just like I didn't, and we wouldn't let Robert waltz back into our lives, thinking that money could fix the damage he had caused. This was about principles, about standing firm in the strength and resilience that my children and I had built over the last 8 years without him. I was determined and told him that we had moved on and didn't need him or his money. I handed him the divorce papers. He looked at them with a mixture of remorse and disappointment. He pleaded, saying he genuinely wanted to make up for all those lost years. However, my resolve was unwavering. Robert then offered to split the proceeds from the lake house sale with me, thinking that might convince us. Emily quickly spoke up, saying we didn't need his charity and that Nathan nodded in agreement, adding that we had everything we needed to be happy without him. At this point, it seemed like Robert finally understood the enormity of the mistake he had made. He began to cry, repeatedly apologizing to the kids. He admitted that leaving us was a terrible mistake and that he understood we might never forgive him. As I walked away from the park, holding hands with Emily and Nathan, a wave of freedom washed over me. It hit me how heavy the burden I had been carrying was, and I felt relief in letting it go. Watching my children stand up for themselves and support me filled me with pride. Our divorce would proceed as planned, and while I knew it might take time before I was free of him legally, I was ready for that. In the meantime, I decided to take some time off work to focus on creating beautiful memories with my children. We had been planning a trip to Disneyland for a while, and I was excited to finally make it happen. I wanted to fill our lives with laughter and joy, helping to overshadow the painful memories of the past. I knew that as long as we had each other, we could face whatever challenges the future might bring with strength and resilience. My children and I are on a journey toward healing, working together to build a new life that is stable and honest. This chapter in our lives is far from over, but from now on, we are committed to writing our own story. I am determined to fill this next part of our lives with love, trust, and growth. Since my last update, I have some exciting news to share. I was promoted at work, and this feels like a huge achievement for me. It took a long time to reach this new position, but now I am finally earning a comfortable income, which allows me to provide even more for my family. This promotion brings not only financial security but also a sense of pride in knowing that my hard work and dedication have paid off. As for the divorce proceedings, things are going well. I have hired a fantastic lawyer who understands the history between my husband and me. She is confident that the divorce process will go smoothly. Although it may not be simple, it is a necessary step for both closure and a fresh start. My family and friends have been incredibly supportive during this time, standing by my side and providing encouragement. Now that I am earning more than enough, I plan to send my children to therapy. I recognize that they may have abandonment issues, and I want them to have the support they need to process their emotions and work through any lingering problems. I have been researching therapists who specialize in helping children and families navigate complicated feelings, and I believe I have found a compassionate and experienced therapist who can guide us through this. In the meantime, I also believe in encouraging my children to explore their interests beyond academics. My daughter, Emily, has a wonderful talent for art. She spends hours creating beautiful paintings that now brighten our home. My son, Nathan, has always shown a natural talent for soccer. Every weekend, we attend his games and cheer him on from the sidelines. It fills me with pride to see my children thriving and enjoying their lives. Regarding Robert, we have not been in contact, and I think it's best to keep it that way. As many of you guessed, his affair partner, Isabella, reached out to me unexpectedly one day. To my surprise, she didn't apologize, as you might expect from someone in her position. Instead, she expressed anger and resentment towards me, blaming me for allegedly taking Robert away from her. She accused me of being the reason their relationship fell apart and lashed out at me with hurtful names and accusations. Her messages were aggressive and left me feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of her anger. I was shocked that this woman could direct her rage at me when she was the one who played a role in breaking up my family 8 years ago. I responded to her by asserting that I had no desire to be with Robert anymore, as I am currently in the process of getting a divorce. I reminded her of the pain and confusion my family experienced when Robert left us for her, and I told her she had no right to contact me. I emphasized how our lives had been turned upside down and how my children had suffered as a result of her actions. I made it clear that I never wanted Robert back, and if she needed someone to blame, it should be herself and her gambling addiction. After sending that message, I blocked her. I hope she won't try to contact me again, as I want to protect the peaceful life my children and I have built. I do still talk to Robert's mother occasionally, as she has always been kind to me. She has expressed her regrets about how everything has turned out and encouraged me to do whatever it takes to find happiness. Interestingly, she also revealed that because I decided not to reconcile with Robert, the lake house would not be going to him as his father had intended. This was unexpected but felt deserved. Robert's selfish choices not only shattered our family but also affected another family, so it seems fitting that he should not benefit from those decisions. It was only fitting that after all the turmoil, he should suffer. It had become time to move forward, leaving the past behind, and I understood that this would be a challenging journey. However, I could feel that the healing process was already well underway. My children were growing strong and thriving, and with each passing day, our future seemed to shine a little brighter. Now, it was time to turn the page and share the next story. This brings me to story 2, where my whole family turned their backs on me. They stopped talking to me entirely when they began to believe that I wasn't my dad's son. I had grown up in a home filled with happiness, my parents were deeply in love, and they poured that love into my siblings and me. They were always attentive and caring, putting our needs before their own without hesitation. My relationship with my parents was especially close. My dad worked long hours to provide for our family, but he made sure to carve out time for us whenever he could. He took us on fishing trips, taught us how to play sports, and shared stories from his own childhood, creating cherished memories. My mom was the glue that held our family together. She prepared delicious meals, helped us with homework, and ensured that we were always clean and presentable. I adored my parents, and there was no doubt in my mind that they loved me back. But everything changed when my parents started to fight. I had always seen them as the perfect couple, as they had been together for as long as I could remember, and they rarely had arguments. But one day, I began to notice a shift. At first, their disagreements were small and manageable, but soon they escalated into frequent, intense arguments. I tried my best to ignore the shouting that echoed from the living room, but it became impossible. I could hear every heated word from my room. One day, amidst a particularly brutal fight, I heard my dad confess to having an affair years ago. My mom was furious, and in her anger, she revealed that she had cheated too. The argument quickly spun out of control, and that's when my dad questioned my paternity. I was utterly shocked. The thought that he might not be my biological father had never crossed my mind. My mom was at a loss for words, her eyes brimming with tears, while I could see the guilt and shame wash over her face. My dad stormed out, and my mom rushed after him. From that moment forward, everything changed in our family dynamic. My siblings sided with my dad and refused to talk to me. They were furious not just that their parents had cheated on each other, but also that I might not even be my dad's biological son. The hostility and disdain they showed me made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Once a close-knit family, we now felt like a bomb had exploded, tearing us apart. My mom and dad began to treat each other with open hostility, and their anger soon spilled over to us kids. My siblings, who had once been my allies, turned against me, blaming me for the unraveling of our family. They said I was a constant reminder of my mom's affair and that it was possible I wasn't my dad's real son. Their hurtful words cut me deeply. It felt as if the warmth of our family had disappeared. My parents became cold and distant, and my siblings acted with meanness and vindictiveness. I reached out to my parents, hoping for some kind of connection or support, but they seemed perpetually busy or distracted by their own issues. It felt like I had vanished into thin air, I was invisible to them. My siblings avoided me at all costs, excluding me from their gatherings and refusing to speak to me. It was as if I didn't even exist in their eyes. The rejection was nearly unbearable, and I was left grappling with feelings of loss of my family, my home, and even my sense of self. I felt lost and alone, unsure if I could ever find my way back to the family I once knew. At first, I tried to reach out to my siblings. I called and texted them, wishing to talk things through and mend the rift. But my efforts were met with silence. I even attempted to contact my parents, but they were always busy or out of the house. In my desperation to find someone to talk to make sense of everything that was happening, I decided to visit my mom's house, hoping for a chance to connect and understand. Hoping to have a heart-to-heart with her, I thought maybe some distance would do us good. But when I finally saw her, she told me to go away. Her words stung like a sharp knife to my heart. I couldn't believe my mother would say such hurtful things to me. After that moment, I fell apart emotionally. I spiraled down into a deep depression. I felt lost, like I didn't know who I was or where I belonged. It was as if I was a stranger in my own body, and I had no idea how to change it. I stopped going to work, stopped hanging out with friends, and even abandoned the activities that once brought me joy. Most of my days were spent in bed, either sleeping for hours on end or just laying there, staring blankly at the ceiling. I barely ate and, as a result, lost a considerable amount of weight. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, until nearly a year passed, and I was convinced that I would never escape the overwhelming darkness that had taken over my life. Although I lived close to my family, I hadn't heard from them in ages, and still felt incredibly far away from them. My siblings and I used to spend a lot of time at our parents' house, so their absence weighed heavily on me. I missed them deeply. I had been so wrapped up in my own pain that I failed to notice how supportive my friends had been throughout this tough time. They would call, check in on me, and invite me out. At first, I rejected their offers and wanted to wallow in my misery instead, thinking that was how I had to cope. But as time went on, I gradually began to join them for outings again. We would go to the movies, grab a bite to eat, or just spend time hanging out at home. Their company reminded me that I wasn't alone, and for that, I felt incredibly thankful. Slowly, I started to focus again on my well-being, reaching out for help through therapy and support groups to help manage my feelings of rejection. My friends consistently stood by me, and I leaned on them more than ever. Initially, I hesitated to share the situation with my family. I felt embarrassed and ashamed, but as I opened up, talking about it with my friends became a way to process my emotions and begin to heal. They listened to me without judgment, offering comforting words and encouragement that I desperately needed. I also found comfort in returning to hobbies that made me happy. I picked up my guitar again, something I had set aside when my depression took control of my life. Playing music became an outlet for my emotions, soothing my soul in ways I hadn't expected. As I started to take better care of myself, I noticed a gradual improvement in my mental health. The heavy sadness that had once engulfed me began to lift, allowing me to think about the future for the first time in a long while. My friends remained by my side, cheering me on through every bump in the road, reminding me that I wasn't alone and that I had people who loved and cared about me, even if my family didn't. Then, out of the blue one day, my grandpa reached out to me. He said he couldn't stand how my family had treated me any longer and wanted to help fix things. He convinced my father and me to do a paternity test. I was hesitant, unsure if diving back into that complicated situation was the right choice, but I was also curious to know the truth. When the results came back and confirmed my connection to the family, they were shocked. They couldn't believe their mistake. Realizing the pain they had caused me, they expressed deep remorse and were eager to make amends. I felt torn about their sudden desire to reconcile. On one hand, it was wonderful that they wanted to reconnect, something I had long dreamed of, but on the other hand, the hurt and betrayal from their earlier actions still lingered. Despite their apologies and pleas to move forward together, I remained reluctant. I had worked hard to move on and build a new life for myself, and I was unsure if I wanted to allow them back in. The fear of being hurt again haunted me. But even while grappling with these emotions, my family continued to reach out. They called me often, hoping to bridge the gap that had formed between us. They called me and sent letters, trying to reach out in every way they could. It was like a flood of messages came my way, and then my parents even showed up at my doorstep one day. There they were, standing in front of me, looking desperate and pleading. They begged me to give them a chance to make things right, to fix everything that had gone wrong between us. They promised that they would do whatever it took to earn my forgiveness, which made me feel so overwhelmed. Their persistence was obvious, and it felt like they were trying so hard because they really were sorry for what they had done in the past. It was clear that they genuinely wanted to reconnect with me, to bring our family back together. But even with all of that, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that their reasons for reaching out were more about their guilt than about me. I wanted to believe that they really wanted to make amends, but doubt crept into my mind. So, I decided to ask my grandpa how my family had been doing during the 3 years I had been away from them. He told me that my parents had gone to therapy and that they were back together again. Hearing that hurt more than I expected. It felt like they had moved on with their lives, like I had never existed in their world. I felt left out, unwanted, as if their pleas for forgiveness didn't mean much at all. Even with all their promises, I couldn't bring myself to reconnect. In that moment, I knew I had to protect myself. I didn't want to reopen old wounds that could bleed again. I didn't want to put myself in a vulnerable position after everything that had happened. I remembered how they had dropped me once, and the fear that they could easily do it again was too real. So I told them that they could continue on without me, just like they had all these years. It wouldn't make any difference to me. I had finally found peace and happiness in my life, and I wasn't willing to let them take that away from me again. I had built a new family around me. My friends had been there for me every step of the way when I needed support, when I felt alone. They were the ones who truly cared, who had shown me what it meant to have people in my life who valued me for who I was. My focus had shifted to them, the ones who made me feel loved and accepted, so there was no way I could go back to a situation that had caused me so much pain before.